Alright, hi everyone. I hope you guys are having a great day. So today we're going to talk a little bit more about behavior modification, specifically some applications of behavior modification, and we'll get into token economies quite a bit today. So a token economy can allow you to do a behavior modification program with a large group of students. So imagine if you're a first grade teacher that has 25 6-year-olds. It's very difficult to keep up with the positive reinforcement, the negative reinforcement, the positive punishment, the negative punishment, if they're different for each student. So maybe there is a few target behaviors that you can think of that you would like to encourage in all of your students. So token economies are a great way to do behavior modification with a large group, although you can do a token economy with just one person, for example, but often done in a large group. So you will have an activity that's going to be due by 7:59 a.m. tomorrow morning. And so just let me know if you guys need anything. Otherwise, we're going to continue on talking about behavior modification. Alright, so as I said in the introduction, today we're going to talk about applications of behavior modification. And so one thing that you need to understand to be able to use operant conditioning would be reinforcement schedules. Now, the idea of reinforcement is that you are giving a reward to try to increase a behavior. But we have to think about how many times are they going to have to do the behavior before they get the reward. Am I going to give the reward or the reinforcer every time they do the behavior, or am I only going to give it sometimes? If we are going to reinforce the behavior every time, then that's continuous reinforcement. But as we'll talk about in the next slide, there are some reasons why we might not want to use continuous reinforcement for a long period of time. So a reinforcement schedule is a plan for when we are going to give reinforcement for good behaviors. So there are 4 different kinds of schedules here: fixed ratio and variable ratio, and then fixed interval and variable interval. Now, the ratio versus interval bit tells you whether it is based on your behavior or based on time. And then fixed means that the individual knows how much time is going to pass or how many behaviors they have to do in order to get the reinforcement, whereas variable means that they don't know. So let's talk about some examples here. With fixed ratio, it says we reinforce after a set number of responses. Now, because it's ratio, it's based on behavior, and because it's fixed, the person knows how many times they have to do the behavior to get the reward. So, for example, let's say that I tell my son, for every 3 math problems you do, you can have a piece of candy, right? So it's ratio because it's based on his behavior, and it's fixed because he knows how many times he has to do the behavior to get the reward. Now, because it is based on his behavior, it's up to him how long it takes him to do those math problems, right? To do 3 math problems, depending on how hard they are, it could take 30 seconds or it could take 3 days, right? So it's not based on time. It doesn't matter how long it takes him to do the problems. It's based on his behavior or how many problems he does, right? Now, variable ratio is still ratio, so it's still based on behavior, but the difference is the person doesn't know how many times they have to do the behavior in order to get the reward. So one classic example of variable ratio schedule is gambling. So, for example, if you go to a casino and you put coins in a slot machine, it's based on your behavior. In other words, you have to put the coin in to win anything, but it's variable because you don't know. You could put in 1 more coin and win $1 million, or you could put in 1,000,000 coins and not win, right? It's variable. We consider variable ratios to be almost addictive because it feels like we don't know how many times we have to do the behavior. I could do it just 1 more time and I could win $1 million. Another example here could be fishing, depending on how you fish. I don't know if you guys fish, but variable ratio would be if you're a person who is always casting your line, which is me, I can't just leave it out there, then you don't know how many times you have to cast the line before you're going to catch a big fish. It could be that you went out there and cast your line 1 time and caught a large fish, or you could cast your line 100 times and not catch a fish. So it's based on your behavior. So how long it takes you to do the behavior is up to you, but it's variable, meaning that you don't know how many times you have to do the behavior in order to get the reinforcement. Now, interval schedules are going to be based on time, not behavior. So, for example, with fixed interval, it means that you're going to get the reinforcement after a certain amount of time, and you know how much time is going to have to pass before you get the reinforcement. So let's say, for example, that a teacher told you that your exam grades were going to be posted at 3 o'clock. That means that you have a fixed interval here. You know how much time you're going to have to wait before you get the reinforcer, assuming that you find your grades reinforcing. Now, you do actually have to do the behavior after the amount of time, right? If you never check your grade at 3 o'clock, then you're not going to see your grade. So you do actually have to do the behavior, but because it's based on interval, there's nothing you can do to speed it up, right? You could check your grades 100 times all day long, or you could just check it one time at 3 o'clock. Either way, you get your grade at 3 o'clock. Your behavior can't speed it up. It can't make the interval go by faster. But with fixed interval, then you know how much time you have to wait. For example, if you have a bus schedule, assuming that the schedule is accurate and the bus is running on time, then you can get the reinforcement of catching the bus if you get there at the right time. Now, you could get there an hour early, or you could get there a second early, but as long as you're there at the time after the fixed interval and you get on the bus, then you'll get your reinforcement, right? So this is reinforcing after a fixed amount of time. And then finally, variable interval means that it's based on time, but we don't know how much time is going to have to pass before we get the reward. So an example of this could be if the teacher says, I'll post your grades when I finish with them, but you don't know what time the teacher is going to post the grades. So you have to wait a certain amount of time to get your grade, but you don't know how long it's going to be, right? So it's variable interval. Or if you don't have a bus schedule or the bus is not running on schedule, then it's variable interval. You don't know how long you're going to have to wait before the bus gets there. Okay? So these are examples of intermittent reinforcement schedules, which just means that we're not giving the reinforcer every time we do the behavior. So on the other hand, continuous reinforcement means that we are giving the reinforcer every time we do the behavior. And initially, it's better to start off with continuous reinforcement because this allows students to learn the behavior. If they've not been doing the behavior before, it may take them some time to learn the association between the behavior and the reinforcer. So initially we start off with continuous reinforcement. For example, maybe initially I give my son a piece of candy every time he does a math problem, just so that he can see that there's an association between doing his math and getting his candy. However, there's a reason why we don't stick with continuous reinforcement forever. Usually after enough time passes and the behavior is starting to happen more and more, we're going to switch to intermittent reinforcement. The reason that we might make that switch and stop reinforcing every time, well, there are several reasons. First of all, the person could get bored of the reinforcer, right? My son might decide he doesn't want the candy anymore. Also, it's just not practical to reinforce every good behavior. It's certainly possible that the teacher might not be available to give the reinforcement, or it might be that the teacher doesn't see the behavior happening and so they miss it. Continuous reinforcement is not very practical to maintain long term. So we're probably going to switch our students or our children or whatever the case may be over to an intermittent reinforcement. Now it says students on fixed schedules show less persistence and faster extinction. So we said last time that extinction meant unlearning your conditioning. So with a fixed schedule, when you know how many times you have to do the behavior or how much time has to pass, students actually won't work as hard. Remember that I said that variable ratio is actually fairly addictive. To finish up my fishing example, I said that it's variable ratio if you cast your line over and over again and you don't know how many times you have to cast your line to get a reward. But it would be variable interval if you cast your line and sat and waited. You don't know how long you're going to have to wait before a fish will bite. Now, variable interval or variable ratio, students will actually work harder for that because they never know when the reinforcement is coming and it takes longer to extinguish that way. So probably if you can do variable, that really works. All right, so continuing on with our discussion about applications of reinforcement, reinforcement being anything that we're doing to increase a behavior, shaping is a certain kind of reinforcement. It says it involves teaching new behaviors by reinforcing successive approximations of the desired behavior. All this really means is that sometimes we have a goal that we cannot go out and do immediately. We have to work on some steps between here and there. So let's say that I never exercise, which is fairly accurate. Let's say that I want to run a marathon, which is not very accurate, but for the sake of an example, let's say that I want to run a marathon. It's not a good idea or even possible probably for me to go from zero exercise to running a marathon. I mean, chasing my kids probably counts as exercise, but it's not really practical for me to do that. So for me to set the goal of running a marathon immediately, I would never get that reinforcement because I would never meet that goal. So what you do is you come up with baby steps along the way, and you reinforce yourself for every step. So this is called successive approximations because every step looks closer and closer to the final behavior, or more and more like the final behavior. So maybe initially just walking down the street a half a mile, just walking a half a mile might be the first step, and I reinforce myself for that. And then I do that a few times until it's fairly easy for me to walk a half a mile. And then maybe I go from a half a mile to a whole mile, and then from a whole mile to 2 miles. And so gradually, as I get better at the behavior, I'm going to have to do more and more of the behavior to get the reward, right? So this is a way, think about shaping as if you're molding something or making a pot out of clay. You have to gradually shape it into what you want, or the behavior that you want. So you're not going to be able to go from being a couch potato to running a marathon immediately, but you just reward yourself for steps along the way, right? All right, and then I believe this is the last thing in this particular set of slides before we start the next set. It is important for you to be able to decrease undesirable behaviors. The last few slides have talked about reinforcing behavior, and reinforcement is great, and we should start with reinforcement, but it would be wrong for me to send you guys out into the world having taken this class without telling you or teaching you how to deal with undesirable behaviors in your students, because this is absolutely going to happen. So when we have students that have bad behaviors, there are a few options we can do. First of all, you guys already know about negative and positive punishment, right? Negative punishment means I'm going to take away something to decrease a behavior, right? So take away recess time, take away, time out, so taking away attention, all these things, take away their responsibility. If the student enjoys being the hall monitor or something like that, take that away. You're taking something away. Whereas positive punishment means that you're adding something here. So, for example, giving extra work, extra homework could be an example of positive punishment. So you're adding something to decrease a behavior. So we already know about these. Now, you guys also know about extinction a little bit as well. We said that extinction was unlearning a conditioning. So this is basically what happens if we stop reinforcing a behavior that was previously reinforced. After enough time passes, that behavior will stop. So if the child or the student is doing a bad behavior because they're getting reinforced for it, and reinforcement doesn't necessarily have to look like it's positive. For example, yelling at a child is still attention, and it can still be reinforcing, right? If the student is, or the child is wanting attention, then they might purposefully annoy the teacher just to get the teacher's attention, right? Even if it's negative attention, it's still attention. So we have to try, if we're going to use extinction, try to figure out what is reinforcing the problem behavior. So maybe their classmates think what they're doing is funny, or maybe they enjoy the attention that they get from the teacher. Whatever the case may be, figure out what is reinforcing the problem behavior and then stop the reinforcement. Take the reinforcement away. After enough time passes, the behavior will decrease. And then finally, this is one that I really like because I do like using reinforcement. Use differential reinforcement. Now, this means that what we'll do is we will reinforce the individual for doing something that is incompatible with the problem behavior. So let's say, for example, that the student is poking a classmate or doing something with their hands to annoy a classmate. So maybe I could reinforce them for having their hands clasped together under their desk, right? So when they're doing that, they cannot be poking their neighbor. So I'm not punishing them for poking their neighbor, but rather I'm reinforcing them for doing a behavior that prevents them from poking their neighbor, right? For example, if we have a student who's always talking in class and not being respectful, I could punish the student for talking when they shouldn't be talking, or I could catch the student being quiet and reinforce them for that, right? So differential reinforcement just means that I am reinforcing the opposite of a bad behavior to try to increase that opposite behavior, which should decrease the problem behavior. All right, so now we're going to go through the second set of slides on token economies. So token economies are a way of applying operant conditioning to a large group of individuals. But before we can talk about token economies, we have to understand some of the terminology that we're going to be using. So with token economies, we have to know the difference between unconditioned and conditioned reinforcers. Now, we said that reinforcers were anything that we enjoyed or that increased a behavior. So an unconditioned reinforcer is something that we don't have to learn to like. We are just born liking. For example, food, right? Nobody had to teach us to enjoy food, especially maybe food that tastes good or sweets. Nobody has to teach a child to like candy, right? Most children just naturally like candy. That's unlearned. On the other hand, though, there are some reinforcers that we have become conditioned to enjoy because we have learned an association between this conditioned reinforcer and another reinforcer. Let me give you an example of a conditioned reinforcer. Money. If you give money to a 2-year-old, they probably don't understand what they're supposed to do with money. Money in and of itself is not very entertaining. They'll throw it out the window or flush it down the toilet or color on it or chew on it, which they really shouldn't chew on it. But kids don't understand money necessarily. You have to learn to find money reinforcing, right? We are not born enjoying money. However, we learn as we get older that money is reinforcing because we learn to pair money with all the things we can buy with that money, right? So if you could not use your money to buy anything, then it wouldn't actually be worth anything. Think about being stranded on an island with $100,000. It's not going to do you any good, right? So the only reason that money is reinforcing is because we can trade it for backup reinforcers, right? So it says that tokens are conditioned reinforcers that can be collected and exchanged for backup reinforcers. And you can think of money as a token, where the money is only valuable because we can exchange it for something else. Now, a token can be anything. It can be a certain number of points, or it can be stickers on a chart. Or with my kids, my kids have Ziploc bags on the refrigerator with their names on it, and I give them raffle tickets for good behavior, right? A token is anything that you learn that you can exchange for something that you want. So the idea of a token economy is that we will give these tokens to individuals. They will accumulate them and earn them and collect them, and then after they get enough of them, they will exchange them for backup reinforcers that they want. Now, why would we do this? Why would I give my kids raffle tickets that they can exchange for fun activities or fun toys? Why not just give them the fun activities or the fun toys? Well, a couple of reasons, but it really boils down to practicality, right? It says that conditioned reinforcers can often be delivered more immediately than backup reinforcers. So I can't take my kids to Walmart every single time they do something good. I just don't have, it feels like I do because I feel like I spend most of my life in Walmart, but it's not practical for me to be able to do that. However, what I could do is every single time my kids do something good, I give them a praise and I give them a ticket or whatever the token is. And then they know that they can save up a certain number of tickets to get something fun, right? So this helps bridge the delay between the behavior and the more powerful backup reinforcer. So children want these backup reinforcers, and so they will learn to work for the conditioned reinforcers so that they can earn the backup reinforcers. It's important when you're giving a reinforcement to reinforce the behavior immediately, right? So as soon as they do the good behavior, they get the reward. But we can't always do that if we are trying to give the backup reinforcer every time, but a conditioned reinforcer is something that we can give pretty immediately. Alright, so how effective is this going to be? Well, first of all, the strength of backup reinforcers matters. So remember that the token is a conditioned reinforcer that can be exchanged for a backup reinforcer. Now, we have to make sure that we have backup reinforcers that individuals are willing to work for, right? If I tell my students that they can turn in their tickets or their points or whatever for extra homework, they're not going to want to do that. Can't tell my kids that they can turn in their tickets to get extra broccoli. That's not going to work. So backup reinforcers are strong if they're something that people want. Also, the variety of backup reinforcers works as well. It's important to have a generalized condition reinforcer whenever possible. So a simple condition reinforcer means that you can only turn in your tokens for one thing. And you'll see some examples of these on the next slide. Whereas with a generalized condition reinforcer, you can turn in your condition reinforcer or tokens for a large number of things. And money is an example of generalized condition reinforcer, where you can, as much as money as you have, you can spend it to get anything that you want, right? So the strength depends in part on the number of backup reinforcers available. Generalized condition reinforcers are going to be stronger than simple condition reinforcers. So we have some examples here. Simple condition reinforcer, once again, is a token that can only be exchanged for one thing. Like, for example, airline miles or subway tokens. In these situations, you are earning points so that you can trade them in for airline miles, maybe on your credit card. There's only one thing that you can do with those points. On the other hand, a generalized condition reinforcer like money or, for example, a gift certificate means that you can get whatever you want to with it. Like if you gave someone a Walmart gift card, there are a lot of different things they can do with that. And then finally, unconditioned reinforcers are reinforcers that we naturally enjoy, right? Food, water, sex, physical comfort, sleep, novelty, so enjoying something new or fun. These are unconditioned reinforcers. Okay. So, as always, though, there are some problems or some concerns with our token economies. First of all, sometimes extinction can happen here as well, and we might not want extinction to happen. Remember that extinction means that we are unlearning the conditioning, or the conditioning is not working anymore. It says failure to use backup reinforcers might make condition reinforcers ineffective. So what if my kids have earned 100 tickets and haven't gotten a chance yet to turn in their tickets to get anything? So they haven't gotten a backup reinforcer for their tokens. It's not going to take them too long to figure out that these tokens aren't actually worth anything. Like I said, your money would be worthless to you if you were in a situation where you couldn't turn it in to get anything. So we have to make sure that at least occasionally people are given the opportunity to trade in their tokens for a backup reinforcer. Alright, so guidelines for effective use. It says early on present backup reinforcers as soon as possible so that they will learn the association between the condition reinforcer and the backup reinforcer. So when I first started doing the token economy with my kids, I gave them the opportunity to go get a prize after they earned like 3 or 5 tickets, like not very many. And I did that because I wanted them to learn that the tickets were fun. When I first gave them the tickets, they're like, okay, that's nice, but what does a ticket mean? So giving them an early chance to turn in their tickets, let them see, oh, this is fun, I do want to work for this. And then as they learn that association and as they learn that the tokens can be exchanged for something they want, then the delay can be gradually increased. As we said, use generalized condition reinforcers whenever possible. So if you think about it, you would probably be more willing to work for money than you would for airline miles. I don't know if any of you guys are frequent flyers, but part of that is because maybe you don't need airline miles, but also because we like having the opportunity to choose what kind of reinforcer we want. Also, we don't want the individuals to satiate on the reinforcer, meaning we don't want them to get bored. If, for example, I told my students that they could turn in their tokens to get extra recess time, after a certain amount of time they would get bored with that. So if I give them several different things they can trade their tokens for, then the token economy will be effective a lot longer. And then applying the same rules for other kinds of positive reinforcers, so giving them immediately, being consistent with them, don't reinforce bad behaviors, all the things we already talked about. So, just to review, condition reinforcers are reinforcers that are not originally reinforcing, but they become reinforcing because we have paired them with other reinforcers. So, the child doesn't know that money is worth anything until the child has been able to take that money and get something that they want for it. Now, tokens are examples of condition reinforcers that we can accumulate and we can exchange for backup reinforcers that we want. And so a token economy is just a behavior modification program that uses these basic building blocks. Now, we can do token economies with young children. We can also do token economies with adults. We can do token economies with individuals who are in institutions, which is something they do pretty frequently. So token economies are very flexible and can be used in a lot of different situations. Okay, so we said earlier that one good thing about tokens is that they can be given immediately. And we've also said that they can be paired with many different backup reinforcers. So we can do a generalized condition reinforcer. And as I just said a second ago, this can be administered to large, diverse groups. So imagine that you're trying to manage the behavior of several different students. Maybe you're a teacher and you have 25 students in your class. It would be very difficult to try to give different kinds of reinforcement to each different student every time they do a good behavior. But a token economy system is so great because you can use it with a large group, and maybe there are certain behaviors that you want all of your students to do, like raising their hand or staying in their seat. And so token economies allow you to reinforce the same good behavior in a large number of students at once, right? So as we go through, if a student raises their hand, they get a token, right? And then that way we actually model good behavior for the other students as well. So token economies work very well in a classroom setting, although, as I said, they also work if you only have 1 or 2 individuals that are taking part in the token economy system. All right, so how are we going to actually go about setting up a token economy? Well, the first thing we have to do is decide on a target behavior, or the behavior that we want to change. Now, with the target behavior, you don't want to choose too many behaviors at once. At the very beginning, maybe you want to choose 1 or 2, maybe 3 behaviors max, because it will be difficult to try to keep up with every single time they do a behavior if you have several different behaviors. So choose the target behavior that's most important to you. And then take a baseline measurement. A baseline measurement is just seeing how many times the behavior happens before you do your treatment. Now, we take a baseline so that we can know how effective our treatment is, and also we can keep an eye on whether or not our treatment is staying effective over a long period of time. Then you're going to select the backup reinforcers, or what they're going to be able to exchange their tokens for. Now, the way that I would do this would be to just ask the students or the children or individuals, what would you be willing to work for? What kinds of things would you like to trade in your tokens for? Now, it has to be something practical, right? We can't necessarily get a pony, but something that the parents or the teacher is able to do that the child is interested in. Now, for the actual token yourself, once you have backup reinforcers, you have to come up with a token. Now, as I said, this could be points, this could be pennies in a jar, it could be raffle tickets, it could be any number of things. It needs to be durable because kids are rough on things. They break things easily, and easy to handle if you want the students or the children to be handling them themselves and keeping up with them. Now, this is very important. Difficult to steal and difficult to counterfeit. This will absolutely happen if, for example, if you do a penny jar where each student gets to put a penny in their jar if they've been behaving. Wouldn't it be possible for a student to get a bunch of pennies at home and bring them in, and when you're not looking, put them in the jar? So now they have counterfeited here. Now they are getting a reinforcement for bad behavior, and that's the last thing that we want to happen. Also, what happens if we have one student who does the good behavior and they get the token? We have another student who then steals the token from the first student. The first student now has lost their token, so they don't get reinforced for the good behavior. The other student has now gained a token by robbing the other student, so they have become reinforced for bad behavior. Not a good idea. So maybe you want to do something where each student gets a different color token, or they have their name printed on it so that you can keep track of whose or whose. So if someone loses it or steals it, then no one else will be able to use it, right? So just some practical things to think about. Kids will try to get away with stuff, and I don't blame them because I guess we all would if we could get away with it, right? Other things to think about: how often will we allow them to turn in their tokens to get backup reinforcers? As we said in the beginning, we want to let them gain or turn in their tokens for the backup reinforcers early on and often, but as they do the program, then you can increase that delay. Also, older individuals would probably have better self-control and would be able to wait longer. With young kids, you probably don't want them to have to wait too long. Also, you have to make sure that you have the right cost for each backup reinforcer, because if they are gaining the rewards for very few points or very few tokens, then there's no incentive for them to try hard. I just have to get 1 or 2 and I can get what I want. But also, if it's where they have to earn 100 tickets to get something that they want, and they figure out pretty quickly they're not going to be able to do that, then they'll just give up, right? They won't get the reinforcer. So you have to think about how much it should cost. Another thing you can consider here is using a token economy for punishment. Now, token economies are intended for reinforcing good behavior, but they could also be used for punishing bad behavior. What you can do here is, if a student does something good, then they get a token. if they misbehave, then they lose a token. And I actually do this with my kids. I use timeout as my punishment. And so in addition to going in timeout for bad behavior, they also, every time they go in timeout, they lose a ticket. And so they are now losing the ability to turn in their tokens for backup reinforcers. So you can use a token economy as punishment as well. However, you may need to teach the clients, if you're the psychologist or the students or the children, whatever the case may be, to accept the fines. So initially, students may be very upset when you take their tokens away. So this could be a really good teaching moment for them to understand that it's their responsibility to keep the tokens and help them understand how they can not lose tokens in the future. So we know that we are going to run into problems with the token economy, and so it's best to come up with an idea of what problems you might encounter in advance and have a plan for them. So we already talked about what to do if somebody's stealing tokens. Maybe we need to make them individualized so that other people can't use them. But think about, what are you going to do if your students are not doing the behavior? So maybe initially they started off doing the good behavior, getting the tokens, getting the backup reinforcers, but lately it seems like they're not interested in earning the tokens anymore. There could be several different reasons for this, but one reason might just be that the backup reinforcers are no longer reinforcing. They might have gotten bored with the candy or the extra recess minutes or whatever the case may be. So you could just ask the person, the children, like, what would you be willing to work for? Is this a problem? Do we need to change? Because if they don't want the backup reinforcers, then there's really no reason to earn the tokens, right? So there are a lot of different potential problems that can come up. Some of them you can plan for in advance. Some of them you'll just have to figure out how to handle on the fly. But for most of them, you can kind of have an idea of the best way to handle it ahead of time. All right. So a couple of thoughts here that people usually bring up when I talk about token economies. People sometimes are hesitant to do a token economy with their kids because they will say to me, shouldn't they go to school and make good grades without being reinforced? Shouldn't they listen to me and do their homework without being reinforced? Why do I have to reinforce them? I understand that sentiment, absolutely. However, let's think about it from our point of view. Would you guys go to class if the teacher didn't give you grades? I mean, you're supposed to learn, right? So would you guys go to class if the teacher didn't give you grades? Or would you go to work if you didn't get paid, right? I think that we live in a large token economy where money is the token, and going to school so that we can get a job, so that we can make money, is reinforcing for us. And so I think that we live in a large token economy. Usually when we do something wrong, we have to pay a fine for it, right? So they take our tokens away, like, for example, a speeding ticket or paying a fine for something else that we do, a parking ticket. So I think that token economies are very natural. However, we do want to wean our students or our clients or our children off of token economies eventually and replace it with social reinforcement, because social reinforcement is much more natural and they're likely to get that in other environments. So maybe perhaps if I'm a second grade teacher and I know that the third grade teacher does not do a token economy, then what I can do is I can kind of gradually wean my students off of the token economy so that they can be ready for third grade. So what I would do here is I would gradually eliminate the tokens or decrease token value so that they're not getting as much out of the tokens. But you also want to make sure that you are replacing the tokens with social reinforcement. So give them praise, give them some, reinforcement that they're likely to find in other settings as well. So praise is something that's pretty natural that I think that we all like. Pat on the back, praise, you did a good job. So we can kind of wean our students off of the tokens and replace it with social reinforcement whenever possible, so that students are likely to get that natural reinforcement in any environment. Okay? Alright, so activity 11, and remember that you do get to drop grades for activities. So if you've gotten full credit on activities 1 through 10, you don't have to complete 11 and 12. But if you missed one or did not get full credit for one, then this is a chance for you to earn those points back. So activity 11, imagine that you are a teacher for a second grade class and you've decided to implement a token economy with your students. So first of all, what behaviors would you reinforce? So what are the behaviors you think would be most important for an entire classroom of second graders? So it could be something related to general behavior, it could be something related to mastering academic skills, social skills, whatever you think. So choose a few target behaviors and then tell me, what would you use as the tokens? So you could use points, you could use pennies, you could use tickets, anything like that, right? And then what would you use as the backup reinforcers? So the thing that they can exchange their tokens for. So here you could think about something that would be reinforcing for a second grader, something that they would be willing to work for individually, or maybe even as a class. Maybe they could all put their tokens together to get a party or something like that, right? So think about this for today's activity, and just let me know if you have any questions about the material, okay? If you need anything, let me know. Otherwise, I will talk to you guys tomorrow.